I think we'll get started a little bit past 1. Monsen, Farmers Association, and I'm going to moderate this session. Get started. We're starting to move into focusing a lot on silvopasture. We received a North Central SARE, Sustainable Agricultural Certification, Professional Development Project grant recently. It's a 2-year project. It's called SFA Professional Development Program in Silvopasture. And 2-year project, and we're just kind of getting off now. The grant provides education and training and outreach, targeting agricultural professionals and farmers that want to be leaders in understanding silvopasture, and then we can take that information and work with farmers and landowners on helping them adopt silvopasture practices. This project complements the LCCMR project that Waye talked about this morning. That they're working with. During this project, we're having training opportunities in regions of the state. This particular Silvopasture track today is covering the central region deliverable for that project. We have workshops scheduled in the north and the southern regions in April. On April 14th, we're having a workshop, sort of a similar layout as this silvopasture track. In Faribault, that's going to be at the fairgrounds, storage building in Faribault. And then another one on April 15th at the Sprout Marketplace in Little Falls. So, training opportunities, and there's about 18 scholarship recipients that have their registration and fees covered to be scholarships available for these upcoming 2 workshops as well. People want to keep track of that. The information on our website and some flyers. We'll also do a field day this summer in the 3 regions, and we're getting those plans. And we'll also do the 3 workshops and 3 field days next summer as well. I'd like to introduce the Silvopasture Learning Network that Extension is working on the LCCMR project. This is going to be an online forum to share ideas, experiences, and information on silvopasture. And you have to sign up if you're interested in that. Sign up to share that. Make your name and email for that, and you can get you signed up on that one. And I would like to introduce Carlson. He's a contractor with SFA. He's been working specifically on silvopasture, and he brings a lot of experience in silvopasture practices on farm. And he's studied for about Oak Savanna, and he studied work on the resource area.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, Mike is cutting in and out. Is that better?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Just hold it real close to me.
How about that? Barely? Not at all? Yeah. I don't know. Can we get the volume up, maybe? Yeah, it's cutting in and out too. Yeah. Yeah, is that better? Okay, all right, we'll just pass this thing around. My name is Carlson. I have a farm by Sauk Center, a couple hundred acres. We started in 2012. We have kind of several different versions of silvopasture there where we're working with overgrown oak forest that used to be Oak Savanna. trying to restore that. Also have about 15 acres of pine planted out into open pasture, and then some popple, sort of an even age. Is this thing on? How about now? Okay, I see there's a green light. Watch the green light. Yeah, and then we have a kind of even age 15-year-old popple stand that was a resprout that I'm managing for Silvopasture too. And I was hired on a few weeks ago to do some of the lead work on organizing, particularly on the PDP side of these grants. And one of the deliverables, in addition to those workshops and field days that Wayne just mentioned, are a couple of actual resource documents. And the first one that we've been working on here and coming up is, we're calling it a Silvopasture Resource Manual or a handbook, something to that effect. It's kind of an evolving format right now, so I don't have a completed document to give you today, but we hope to have this ready by sometime early this summer. I'm kind of thinking it was a reasonable time frame. I'm just going to go through it real quick here and show you what this is, and then we'll kick off the panel. So again, it's a Silvopasture handbook designed to assist land managers and technical support staff on designing and implementing a silvopasture system in woodlands. So it's really a place, you're not going to necessarily find in here, all the answers for how to do it, but you're going to find a kind of a directory to the staff members, farmers, organizations, universities that have information specifically related to silvopasture that's out there, research, or any of the components that might go into silvopasture, whether that's forage, livestock management and grazing, or forestry and tree management and things of that nature. So just moving down here real quickly, you can see we populated some of the technical assistance and mentor section. We have University of Minnesota Extension, NRCS folks, some of the nonprofits that are working in this area. So if you connect with any of these folks, they're probably going to be able to have most of your answers, or they're going to have someone else that they know to connect you with if you're looking for something specific, or if you're at the stage where you're looking to really put together a more broad, holistic plan for your operation. I don't have this section of practitioner farmers populated yet with as much. I imagine this will grow substantially. If you are practicing silvopasture, whatever stage you are, if you have an interest in sharing your experience with other farmers and want to put your name on this, reach out to me or anyone at SFA, and we'll get you on here. The next section is organizations. This is the production resources area where we have SFA, the Savanna Institute, the Land Stewardship Project, Minnesota Office for Soil Health, Cropland and Grazing Exchange. You'll find a lot of this representation here today and some pamphlets on some of these programs. Then next is universities and agencies, including some of the publications that are out there. And, of course, with all this includes the links to the sort of homepage that exists out there for all these agencies. So, if you're looking for something specific, a lot of these university and sort of adjacent university web sources have a lot of resources there to go seek and find things. And then farm business planning, we have a little bit here, though, that with silvopasture is kind of new in the upper Midwest, so we don't have a lot of great information on data and finances and things, but what is out there we hope to have in this section, and we hope to grow that over the next 5 to 10 years. And funding, loans, and grants and cost share, so whether that's SARE or some grants or EQIP, NRCS programs that can be leveraged to help with some of this work. And then just some in the appendices, places to go for tree stock if you're planting trees, forestry and logging information, and then the connection. At this point right now, I just have Bowser's seed mixes and links there for native grasses and forbs for silvopasture samples. Anyways, that will be much more polished up and in a eventually printed format. So it will go soon, I'm sure, on the SFA website, so look for it there. And, yeah, just keep your ear and eyes out for this and the SFA's sort of online connections.
getting set up here. How many of you are practicing silvopasture in your own landscape right now? Raise your hands if you're practicing silvopasture in your own landscape right now. Wow, okay, good. How many have cattle or other livestock that want to be in silvopasture? Okay. How many have woodlands? How many have bare pastures that you want to plant some trees in? Okay, wow, great. Okay. May I ask what trees you're looking at for planting your pasture?
Hazelnuts and mulberry mostly.
Oh, good. Great. And you thinking about maybe doing some alley cropping maybe with the fencing? And very good. Yeah. Good. Excellent. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I just wanted to take a pull that slide.
Our first farmer presenter is Tom Barthel, who farms near Pepper. Tom is a lifelong livestock farmer. Like most farmers, he worked off the farm to sustain his family and his farm through some hard times. He and his wife Kale raised bison, beef, hogs, sheep, turkey, geese, ducks, and rabbits for sale directly to consuming families. The farm is grass-based, natural, humane, regenerative, holistic, organic, and profitable. Tom is a longtime member of the SFA.
Are we on? Good. Thank you. This phrase, Oak Savanna liberation, has been in my mind for a while. I didn't think much of it. But Teresa, at a presentation last summer, caught on with it, and I'm going to keep using it, but I'm going to adjust it a little bit. Thanks for that, Teresa. We're really just, I was raised across the river in the heavy ground to the south, but for 50 years I've farmed in the center of Sherwood County, which is in the Oak Savanna Plain, and it's about 20 miles from here, just about the geographical center of the county. And Wayne's going to do this for me, I think. All right. The farm is 225 acres, and we're in the Anoka sand plain, which means it's just that. Irrigated some at different times over the years, and you can go down 100 feet, and it's the same sand as you've got in the first 5 feet. It's glacial outwash, pretty consistent stuff. But the Snake River has worked its way through here. The Snake is a small river that drains into the Elk, which drains into the Mississippi right there, the Elk River. So there's a relatively wide floodplain up to a quarter-mile wide, so it was where the river's dug out. And that floodplain, or meandering plain, before 1920 was just really a moving swamp. But then in the 1920s, they dredged it out about 6 feet, and so the surface now is peat and muck, but well-drained, reasonably well-drained for that. So, and that's important, relevant to what I'm going to say, because then there's a bank that runs between the high ground, the sandy plain, and the river, and that's where the remnants of Oak Savanna still are on the farm. So this, I'm going to come. This is 120 acres to the right. That's mostly the undulating sand that looked like the Sahara Desert at one time, and it has that same shape. And we're actually looking north on a sand dune. This is a sand dune that runs this way. And this happened to be a place where I wintered the bison and Bale Grazing just to build up this piece of soil, which of course we all know works extremely well. But what I want to talk about is this little chunk of wooded area here. And as I went through it in recent days, I realized there's over 20 small areas on the farm that have one or more oak trees, white oaks, that were originally, they're old enough to have been there. They were savanna before. But this is what, and by the way, this is, most of central Minnesota is like this. So we're Oak Savanna, if it was pasture, and Keith mentioned some of that this morning, this is what it looks like now. I bought this land 50 years ago, and it was much more open, but it wasn't even pastured then. So it's probably been 60 years since this was pastured. And what I'm going to talk about then is the restoration, using the existing trees that are still in many of them still alive, to get back to Oak Savanna. Go ahead. This is that same area, 3 years later. And I love this view because I've lived on this land a long time, and it always bothered me. I could see these oak trees in here, which were open grown. There's probably 4 good ones in this photo, but they were smothered, and they were dying in there. We'll get to some other photos to show that. And so this is after about 3 years of work, and what I'm going to describe is not hiring a contractor, doing it yourself in the off times, at the time of the year when you feel like going out in the woods and doing some cutting, and I'll show some slides on that. But really just with a few chainsaws. I have a big one and a couple small ones. I have some neighbor kids that help me. And my utility tractor, farm tractor, is going to grapple on. That's what I use. And there are many other ways to do it, but I kind of like the work, so I did this. So you'll see there's some stumps in here, but in this foreground area here that I'm circling, there were at least 100 trees. Some of them were larger than 24 inch. You can see some of the stumps. I try to cut the stumps down to the ground if we can. These I haven't hit yet, so I can get in and out with the tractors freely without breaking anything on it. But that takes a few years. Go ahead. This is, I wish it wasn't so light in here, but this is a, can we reduce the lights? Anyone know how to do that? This is a kind of a first step area. This is actually only about 100 yards, but still on the bank. We're in the open ground looking down to the riverbed, which is in the distance about 1/8 of a mile. But this is an open grown oak in here, which is totally smothered, and what you see is what we do first. Okay. I go through, and this is nothing brilliant or sharp about this. This is just the way I do it. It's easy to go in at first and say, I want to clear out for these trees here, and also keep some young ones to come later. And so it's easy to go in and pick the 90% you want to get on the first cut. And they're dropped, they're lying on the ground. In fact, they're still lying. This is about a year ago, and I'll probably get in there in the next week or so. But I make that first cut, and that does a lot of things. It lets some sunshine get to the ground right away, so you get some grasses and other plants started. Because otherwise, this is 100% bare underneath. But the next photo, look at this tree. Look at this. Click one more for me now. It's the same tree. You see, it was open grown. It's easy to identify that, and I think Keith pointed that out this morning. And here's another one behind it. So my primary job here is going to be to open up for these 2 trees again in the end. 3 years of work, perhaps, at different times. Get this all cleared out and save a few young trees. It'll be the next generation. Go ahead. Okay. And here's back to the different view of the same shot I showed you before. This was an open grown tree. There's one here. Here's the stump of one that's probably 150 years old. That tree, like a number of others, while I was waiting to get time, died. So the oldest ones have died in there. There's quite a few. This is a maple here. That's probably a maple, looks like in the distance. And I've got some more thinning to do back here, and I'll get to it next year, the year after, next spring. It's a piece at a time work. And you see we're looking down into the low ground here. So, and then what you see here is some straw left over from bale rings. I'll show you those. I think I said I use chainsaws and a grapple, and actually a well-trained herd of bovines. That's the other tool, and it's really useful to me. And by the way, in the foreground, this was clipped a year before this back here. And you see that this is the speed at which it revegetates. And especially if you use bale rings and bale grazing here, that does an incredible amount. They mix in a lot of manure and some wasted hay. And there's also every hay bale that I buy generally a mix of grass and alfalfa is full of grass seeds and wheat seeds too. But weeds are fine. But you see, this is just 1 year behind the foreground. And by the way, the stumps are cut short, but you can see a couple of these are red oaks stumps that sprouted, and that's what the cattle or the buffalo will do to them. Go ahead. Here's another tree. Oh, this is just along the road. And this is an example. You can drive from here to Bemidji, And you can take 20,000 shots like this. You drive along the road, you see all these trees strangled in here. Go ahead, Wayne, one more. And then there's a little closer. See, this was an open grown oak. It was pastured probably, and then 50, 60 years ago, 40 in some cases, it was let go, and this is the junk we've got now. Go ahead. This is a different area, but I wanted to show how aggressively it was after this oak and this oak. There were actually 2 more in here that died in the last 20 years. This is probably a red. I'll take this one down. This might be a young white. I'm not sure. There's some maples in here. You can see it. I'll leave some young trees. But when you look closer at, here's a bale rig. And I use those as really aggressive tools. I'll push those in whatever season of the year I get to it, as close as I can to the brush. This was cut within the previous 12 months of this photo. And I almost never go in and pull that wood out. Right? If you wait 2 seasons, it weighs half as much. It's a lot lighter and easier. But in fact, the cattle will go through this, or the buffalo, and they'll make trails and they'll walk and they'll start crunching down all the little limbs and everything looks smaller in your wrist. You don't need to pick up. They're going to walk it in. It's just a couple of years of intense grazing. But around these feeders, and I push them in pretty close, and I like to set them on, we set some pictures of this morning, I like to set them in those brushy areas where you've got blackthorn or anything else coming, they'll destroy that. And it's like a big eraser. And what they're going to leave is in this area, which is maybe 30 feet diameter, they're going to grind that up and pushing it to get that hay bale. They ate a raw bale out of there. They're going to grind that all up with more, grind all the bushes up, and plant seeds in there, and leave a lot of fertilizer, and you pull them out, and that plot just becomes beautiful. You don't need to do anything more with that. I do, at times, as often as I get to it, go back and broadcast clover in there, white or red. But grasses you don't need to, you just come out with bales. And there are no such things as weeds. I'll just say that just isn't. It's either something they're going to eat or something that's got a taproot and it's good for fertility, and it just happens. One more, please. That's just a close-up of the same thing. There's a big stump cut off. These are reds, and I'll take these out yet. That looks like that's a white. It may or may not stay. One more ring. And this is really dicey because this is a tamarack here. And so I'm raising these in places that almost no one will say you should raise them. All of this grazing in woodland is a function of management. If you do it right, you can do it. If you don't do it right, don't do it. But this is alder brush. This area here was just as thick as there, is behind it. I cut all these trees of this bush, and the bison then can go in. You got to be careful. This is peat that's got the water table dropped under it. So it's really a fungi. You imagine the river drains is down 6 feet lower than nature had left it. But the alderbush took over, and there's nothing under those alderbush bushes except bare ground and leaves. They grow nothing. It just becomes a jungle in this kind of area. So cutting those off, the cattle will do it just the same. But the bison then will go through, they'll walk on those cut limbs. You don't need to drop them. They can be 20 feet high, or you don't need to pull them out. And they'll just walk them into the muck and then grind them up. And these are shrubs that are going to start again, but they're going to eat them off. They're doing that right now. But you've got to be careful what time of the year. Well, it's not the time of the year, it's actually the condition of the moisture. Because I don't want to destroy these tamaracks and have them step on that too much. So this what's going to prevail in here is mostly canary grass. So we have a diversity of other plants. But it really becomes a good wet meadow with a lot of flowering plants and canary grass in it. It can be managed. One more picture. I think this is my final one. So I'm going to change if I ever give this talk again, I'm going to change it to the techniques that I use for restoring savannas that have 1 to 15 trees in it. I disagree a little bit. That isn't disagree, that's the right word. A savanna is defined as something that has 10 to 50% shade, which is like up to 90% light. And you need that light. You need a lot of that light. And I will argue based on quite a few years of experience, this is the first one I've done, is that the forage yield is much better, significantly better on my sand in this condition here than it is out in the open. The shade, you're not getting shade any place all the time. You're just having some cooling shade through the day. And that's really beneficial on my sand. I don't know how to work on your ground. These are piles back here to burn, and I hate burning them. And Camp sent me an e-message last night with a link to somebody that's making char out of it. If there's a way we can do that, it is incredibly labor intensive. I'd love to do that. And then that's a permanent way to store it. There's no need for herbicides in here. The animals will eat all of these sprouts. But you have to have animals that know to do that. And I would just kind of digress a little bit, but we touched on it some this morning, but having a herd of grazing animals, whether they're sheep or bison or cattle or horses, that know what to eat in a pasture and know what's good to eat and how much, kind of erases all the problems of toxicity or what they should eat or what they shouldn't. I saved, and we talked, it came up this morning on buckthorn. I save a cow over the winter. I'm retired, so I kind of get the numbers down as much as I can. But I save a cow that I see walking down buckthorn. And they'll do that with her. They'll walk it down a 12, 15-foot tree, and they'll walk it down with their breasts in the fall and eat the cherries and the leaves off of them. And those animals destroy the buckthorn after time. It doesn't have to be just small buckthorn. If you have animals that will graze like that or forage like that, they'll do it for you. But you have to watch for it, select the ones in your herd, and then they teach the others. They teach the others what not to eat too much of, because everything in this woods, virtually everything, is toxic or medicinal or nutritious, depending on how much they eat. And that's a cultural thing that animals know. And we forget that they know these things, but they have to know them. They've existed on this planet as long as we have. That's it. Something like that. Did I use up enough time? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Next we'll have Cody Nelson. Cody and his wife and kids own and operate Barthel Cattle Ranch cattle company, as well as Iverson Tree Farm in the Minnesota River Valley. Cody has also founded the Soil RX Incorporation, where it helps farms across the Midwest to incorporate the soil health principles on their farms and ranches. Cody has been implementing regenerative agriculture for 12 years on his own operation, and over the last 5 years, he has really started to improve the way he manages his silvopasture. He's taken several acres of overgrown brush and trees and turned it into a very productive pasture. He has also dramatically increased his profitability in his operation by letting the cows do more brush clearing and manure application through the use of bale grazing through the overgrown silvopasture.
Thank you, Wayne. Can everybody hear me all right? Thank you. So, start out a little bit about myself and our operation. So, several years ago, we were running about 350 mama cows in the west central Minnesota region, and we were in that Renville area at the time. And we were hauling a lot of manure. We were doing it, I kind of feel like we were doing everything wrong. And everybody here's probably heard of Gabe Brown, so I'll tell you a little story. It was February 27th, and we had 11 calves born that night, and it was raining. And I watched this video about calving in sync with nature. And I was sitting there just pounding my head thinking, what are we doing? We're doing everything completely wrong. So that's when I started to realize all this stuff, and then I think Grant and Don Breitrights were over in a different room, but I ran into Grant that winter, and he kind of talked me into planting cover crops for the first time. So that's where it all started. And at the time I was farming with two other gentlemen. We're still good friends today, but this kind of took us down separate paths because I wanted to look into more regenerative practices. How can we increase profit? How can we maybe work a little bit less? Let the cows do a little bit more for us. So we started implementing cover crops and no-till and whatnot. And then when we split the operation up, I got the opportunity to move down to where we're at now. And right now we're in the Minnesota River Valley, directly between Redwood Falls and Granite Falls, or directly between Sacred Heart and Renville. And when we moved there, there was a pasture right along the driveway. It's about 38 acres, and it would run 12 pairs and a bull from, well, I always say from green up till the weekend before deer season. So they zero management whatsoever. And since we've started to increase implement some of these practices, the last number I figured out was we've increased production by 413%. So now we've also kind of added acres because there was a lot of land that they weren't even using because it was all overgrown, brushy timber. I'm not sure what we should call it. There's Oak Savanna. What's that?
A mess.
A mess. It was a mess. So it was Oak Savanna with a lot of cedar trees, which if anybody has a market for cedar of anything, we have plenty of that. So I'd be all about trying to harvest some of that cedar. But I was so tired of hauling manure, and when we moved down to this place, I said we got to find a different way to do this. And at that time, I started researching. I think I was at a conference somewhere. They were talking about silvopasture, so I was a little bit interested in it. And I started researching it, and nobody had any data or nobody had anything at that time about how to take old pasture, old wooded situations that I had, messes, and how to create better pasture. So this is kind of what it looks like in our area. We've got a lot of rock outcroppings throughout the river bottom, and I'll tell you, our farm is 193 acres on the home farm there, and there's 63 that's tillable, and that's on this one side, and then there's just overgrown wooded areas with rock outcroppings all around it. And then we've got about 38 acres of good pasture. And in the first year when we moved out there, well, the last producer still had his cows out there. And about September rolled around, and the cows just kept getting out. And of course, everybody driving by would stop up and tell us their cows were out, which I was used to that growing up, but I wasn't really excited about not having my cows get out. It was somebody else's. So when we brought our cows out there, the last tenant left his, or when he took his cows out, we brought our cows in, and I just started rolling bales out, and I was looking for more areas to set bales, and this is kind of what our situation looked like. We were using a tractor, and we're going out hauling as much hay out as we can, and we were hauling them into areas like this. So I do use a little bit of a bale feeder from time to time. One thing that I want to make clear is I never, ever, ever feed in the same spot twice. It might take 2 or 3, maybe 4 years to come back to that same area. But then I started doing a lot of this, and I looked at this as my bale feeder, and it works really, really well. And then when the bale's almost gone, the bale feeder disappears, and I don't have to move it. Yeah. So I always say I do this because I'm kind of lazy, but it's working out really good because we'll get really good grass production there. So this is another thing that we've got on our farm is we've got a lot of rocks. I'm from down by Redwood Falls area. Yeah, that's all right. So you're going to see some more pictures as we go around, but one place I'm always looking to cover to put hay is on top of these rocks, because I'm convinced over time I'm going to bury these rocks and we're going to have a lot better soil on top of these rocks and I can get them to disappear. I've not found anybody to come in and haul them out, so we're going to try and bury them. So that's the plan. And I had to put a picture. This is how we do a lot of this stuff. I actually still have, this year's kind of slowed things down for the bale grazing in Oak Savanna, because I actually I'm not, to the main cow herd, we've not fed a bale of hay yet. And it's March 7th, or what, I'm not sure what the date is. But anyway, so they're still out, cows and calves are still out grazing the cover crop. So in our area, we have a lot of prevent plant. and we took full advantage of it. We planted some really diverse cover crop blends that we knew would hold the snow load, and we put pears out there, and I kept telling myself I need to go back out and get Kathleen. And then there's all these other people telling me I don't need to worry about it until a month or two before they start cabbing. So we won't cab till May now, so we're fine for a little bit yet. So here's just another, you see a big rock right there. Like I say, I'm always trying to bury those rocks. They're really hard on equipment. So this is kind of what it looks like after that. So it's going to take several bales and several years to get it done. But over time, there's my guard dog there. She's that's Husker, always watching the gates for me. But this is kind of what it looks like, what these areas in the Oak Savanna, or beginning of the Oak Savanna. I want to clarify too, I'm not sure that on the Silvopasture or Oak Savanna, I'm not sure that I'm doing it right. I'm just doing what I've kind of started to do, and when Kent actually watched one of our YouTube videos, and he called me and asked if I wanted to do this, and I didn't even know I was really practicing silvopasture. So, but anyway, but I'm excited about what we're doing because we're not hauling manure, and we're definitely a lot more profitable than we used to be, and we're producing really good grass in these areas. So this is another thing that we'll do along the edges is rolling the bales out, and that's where we roll the bale out there. There's about 65 cows in that group that are out spreading their own manure and just improving the ecosystem there. So this is what it looks like. This is just right outside of our house. One thing that we've noticed as we've started to do more of this, I should go back. That first summer, that grass didn't get more than 6 inches tall. Remember I said it had been grazed really short and kind of managed like a golf green or a golf course for several years. It got up about 6 inches tall, wanted to seed out, and I was just devastated. I didn't know if we'd ever get it there. I had always people tell me, oh, you gotta add fertilizer, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. And I didn't do it. One thing I wish I would have done is I wish I had a soil sample it when we got there, because I know how much we've improved it, but I just know we've improved it by grazing a lot more cows throughout the season. So anyways, but the wildlife have really came on since we've started to utilize some of these principles, and that's a deer coming right up by the house. This is just, I wanted to put this picture in. One thing, I do a lot of videos, I do not take a lot of pictures, so I found this out when I was trying to prepare for this, is I gotta take some more pictures. So I was kind of getting desperate to find some pictures that I had. There kind of shows you, this is in the spring, we had just had a storm. I actually put this fence up the night before, and of course, all the cows were supposed to be over here, and they were over here. But that's kind of what it looks like when I cover an area. You can see in the background that there's still some hay there on the ground, and you can see the grass is growing pretty good. So there is a fawn in there. I'm not sure if you can tell. But anyways, that's kind of, I remember that really well because there was a thick sward of grass there where I'd bale grazed the year before, and the grass was so much thicker, so much more dense, and that's right where that fawn was. So I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to try this video. So we do have a YouTube channel too, so anybody who wants to follow what we're doing, Bale Grazing in the winter a couple years ago.
Probably opened in a tab.
18 months ago, to be exact. It did open in a tab. See how we got grass starting to grow back? Sorry, I can watch it. You guys can. Anybody else want to do this? What's that?
Escape.
Just shut it.
Should go up for the screen.
Okay, so this is just kind of showing what it looks like there. I'll just let myself talk. Some different branches, and this is where we'll go next week. We just keep working our way in. So that is all now cleared. Last winter, that is completely cleared, and I can see all the way down the river. Didn't see anything. Maybe from the Bale. Here's another spot. It's that one bale back in here 2 years ago. So that was completely overgrown. So you guys get the point. I'll open this back up. You get grass coming. This is some of the best grass being underneath trees like this. It's in really good shape. I'll really enjoy getting back here. This has not been grazed here since spring. Okay. Okay, so I just want to kind of show you that video to kind of give you an idea of what I was dealing with and what it looks like. Now, like I told you before, that whole area is cleared out and the grass grows really good. We've not seeded any perennials any perennial grasses or legumes back in that. What we have done, I've done a lot with annuals. So I've done a lot with cover crops in my life. So I'm definitely more my specialty than the perennial side. So I'm always trying to add diversity whenever I can. So we've found brassicas don't work really well there. But when I go in, I'll do it like annual ryegrass and some different clovers and things. They work phenomenal in those situations. So if I want to really stimulate it, last year was the first year I really started to go back in and manage the grazing during the growing season on this land. And I really noticed that set things back. Some of the species I didn't want out there as much, that really set them back a lot more. So I'm excited for continued grazing there. Some other things that we've done, I'm just going to go through the rest of these. Just want to show you, this is actually an area where we rolled bales out in a crop field, and you can see the difference of where the bales were versus where there wasn't. So I like to show all these pictures. This is also an area right on the edge of the Silvopasture area where we got good growth coming. Also, this is Coy. He's my 6-year-old. I think he was 4 in this picture, but ultimately this is why we're doing all this stuff. To me, we're doing it for the next generation. We want to make sure that we provide a better situation for them than kind of what we inherited, and hopefully for several generations. But in that area too, we've bale grazed throughout that whole field, and we've not used any chemicals or fertilizers out in that particular situation. So I know it's not really the silvopasture part, but that's part of what we're doing. So some things we're looking at doing now, this summer we just purchased a tree farm, just a couple miles from our place. We've got 5 different types of spruce trees, 3 different types of pines, and also 5 different types of maple trees. We're trying to figure out, it's a transplant tree farm as well. There's also, we also do Christmas trees as well. We're trying to change that in how we manage that and what we all do. One thing that we've done in the past, or that's always been done on that farm, is we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on pesticides and fungicides on those trees. After going to several different things this winter, some things we're going to do is we're going to really add a bunch of pollinators into that, and then I'm also going to bring the livestock and incorporate them into that tree farm. So, although it's not a silvopasture, I think it's kind of similar to what we're trying to accomplish. I'm really nervous on the little trees and incorporating cows into these. We have thousands of dollars into these rows. Everything's perfect, zigzag and I don't know what you call it, but it's all planned the way it's all planted. And so I'm thinking we're just going to make a lot of long, narrow strips, and we're going to use that to incorporate the livestock. And then we're also going to build chicken tractors that we can run down the rows of those trees. And then we've got some areas where we'll transplant like a spruce tree until they're 20 feet tall. And so as we get these areas to grow up, we'll actually, my thought is we just have a little bit of brome grass that grows there right now. So we're going to incorporate a lot more flowering species throughout there. And we'll use the cows to incorporate the seed, but I can't quite get a drill in there. But then we'll do whatever we can. We've got bees coming in this year, so we're going to try and add as much stuff to that farm as we possibly can. And my goal is to have that set up so when Coy gets to the point of if he wants to go to school or not, or maybe we just bring him right to the farm, and that can kind of be his baby. And I want to prove that he can make a living on 72 acres, and we don't need to have 10,000 acres, So that's kind of some of the stuff we're working on. He always talks about there's a house there at the tree farm, so we got that right now. It's on think it's VRBO or Airbnb, but that's his house. So he's pretty excited about the pool table in the back too. So, but anyway, so that's what I've got, and I'm excited to answer some questions here after we get through. So thank you.
Next, we're going to switch species a little bit. Allysse Sorensen is the owner of the Munch Bunch, a farm and targeted grazing service with goats that work on more than 100 acres of land annually along the St. Croix River in Minnesota and Wisconsin. She's a member of the Ecological Services Livestock Network here in Minnesota and runs the directly listing website, highergoats.com. Allysse?
I'm sure you love the name, everybody does. So we're a contracted grazing company, targeted grazing, and we only have goats. And for a long time, goats are just kind of the minority livestock, so it's really hard for me to utter the words like, I am a farmer. We actually only own 10 acres of our own land, and so it's really important that we get the goats out working the rest of the year, so they're out from about May through the end of October, whenever we can stand to keep them out. It's a lot of work. But we could keep them out all the time if we really wanted to. There's definitely demand for that. So our history is we started in 2015, and we started with 2 goats. And we didn't even bring them home. We just brought them right to our first job. And they just ate red leaves, like for the first week. And we were like, okay, we failed. They're not eating anything. So we almost abandoned it after a week. But luckily we kept going, and they did eventually learn to eat buckthorn and all that stuff. So 90% of our business is buckthorn. And we typically work in city parks and residential places. It's about 50% right now, just municipalities versus residential. And the demand is definitely there. We're kind of hot to keep people happy. So we're trying to get more people involved in this because you can bring your animals off the farm and make some money doing it. So actually both of my husband and I, this is our sole income through the Munch Bunch. We don't have any off-farm jobs. And I like to make a joke that I can't really afford Ben & Jerry's ice cream, but I can totally make enough to feed myself and my goats, at least right now. So it's really fun work. It's really rewarding work. And what we have here is a picture of them at Prospect Park in Hudson. And there's a lot of fairly low-level buckthorn here that they're working on. This was actually 2 years ago, so I wish I had a picture a little more recent, but kind of gives you an idea of what it might look like as far as the transition, as a degraded woodland, and then all of a sudden it's a park. And so it's interesting to have the dynamic of the people watching the goats. And well, I'm sure you guys have seen this on the news, right? So what am I going on about? Okay, so this is Governor Knowles State Forest did a 10-year study on buckthorn management options. And at the tail end of that study, we were invited in to bring goats, working on 10 acres of that. And this particular site was pecan mowed over the winter, and then what you see here is the growth that came back just 5 months later. And it was already well past my knee. I know I'm a short person, but it grew a lot. So we brought 80 to 100 goats in this area. We did 2-acre sections, so it's very intensive what we do. It's, almost beyond just managing it, but it's mob-targeted grazing. We really want to kill these plants. When people always ask me, what about the native plants? Honestly, we don't see a heck of a lot of native plants in what we're doing because it is so bad out there. I'm tripping through pop cans, you know. This is not like a beautiful place that actually has something. So when we take this away, we do then see the native plants. We're not seeding. They will come back. So I don't worry about some of those losses at the beginning. This is after the goats went through. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so I like to say, after the goats are through, you can see clear to Canada.
How long did that take?
So the whole 10-acre project took us about 30 days with 80 to 100 goats. And what I really loved about this site was, I mean, you can see the moss is still there, it's intact. There was a nest of wasps or whatever the heck lives down there. I'm a goat expert, not an insect expert, but they wanted to hurt me, and I found their nest, and everything around their nest was completely eaten. There was nothing green around it, but the nest was just intact. And I just think that's such an awesome testament to what the goats can do to leave our environment so perfectly, preserved, but while killing the invasive plants. Anyway. So this is an overlook in Hudson. It's actually Prospect Park, a different area of Prospect Park. And this was, they wanted to see that overlook. Actually, they were probably making money off of weddings up there. So they had some financial incentive to get rid of buckthorn there, obviously because buckthorn can grow to be, 30, 40 feet if it wants to. So, especially in a high sunlight area like this. But anyway, so it was 30, 40 feet back, and they had cut down everything so that the goats could reach everything. And here we go again. So this project we'll be doing next year as well. So we'll have some better pictures of what grows back. Because obviously this isn't the end result. We don't want that to be the end result. But that's just how we're clearing it so that we can make sure that those things don't regrow. I think, yeah, that's my last slide. So that's just kind of an overview introduction of who we are.
Next we have Doug Voss. He's also starting with SFA recently. He's the third generation on his family farm, where he and his wife Beth are raising a family of 5 boys. The farm is located by Painesville, and historically it was operated as a dairy farm. The grandparents started farming there in the Depression. In 1999, they certified the farm for organic production with the desire to reduce their impact on our environment and produce a better product that we could feel good about. Several challenges in the farm's past, such as stray voltage, poor water quality, disease, and chemical contamination, has blessed him with experiences one can only and truly understand by experiencing. Influenced by many great people passionate about soil health, they have converted all acres to a perennial system and implement adaptive grazing practices. Currently, the farm includes a grass-fed beef herd, a small dairy, herds of sheep, broiler chickens, and a custom grazing enterprise.
Thanks. So the downfall of being before is the last. You get to hear everybody else talk about what you were going to talk about. And then you wonder how you're going to talk about what you had planned to talk about. So I thought it was really super cool that so many people raised their hands when they talked about their already practicing silvopasture. And we kind of stumbled upon it when you talked a little bit about how we were traditionally a dairy farm, and some of the pictures you're going to see here, they've had cattle exposure for many, many years. But dry Holstein cows that just were turned out. And of course, a lot of people know that, livestock, they didn't necessarily go the places you wanted them to go, and they didn't have the impact that could probably drive that ecosystem to where you maybe wanted it to be.
And so, just a little picture, so in your mind you'll have to think back as far as a piece of property you may have seen before, and you can't see past 2 feet into it, right? It's just gnarly, it's a mess. Somebody just, talked about it before. It's a jungle. And so every once in a while in the area, we'd miss a cow and she'd have her calf up there. And so my dad makes me look really small. He's a pretty big guy, and so there was always this challenge of how to catch that calf if you didn't find it after about 2 or 3 days. And then, natural instincts would kick in, and all of a sudden you don't have a calf, you have some wild thing. And so you'd be sneaking around all these buckthorn bushes, hoping to find this little bitty calf sleeping long enough that you can pounce on it, hold on until somebody else can come and help you. And so that was what I remembered when I was a yay high. And so to look at what it's come to now is it's remarkable because we stumbled upon it with some of the changes we were making on our farm and other areas. And so one thing I appreciate the most out of it is when we're looking at the whole farm as an ecosystem now, we can advance personal development by concentrating on big picture items and applying principles, and then finding all the different places later that we can apply those principles and how we can help our farm as a whole much further than originally thought. So, if anybody's looking at starting this for the first time, listen to those people that tell you, take baseline data. If it's just a picture, take lots of them. And Cody is nodding with me. So I wish I had all kinds of pictures to show you that we couldn't see 2 feet into this woods before. But the main reason I've got this slide here is because right here, that's what we expected year and year as far as production of the grasses and the forages our cattle can consume. And some people look at this trail and they think, well, cattle management, but the fact of the matter is we still have a lot of these trails, and it's not because we're not managing our cattle properly, it's because we have so many stinking deer that they're maintained season long. And so I think that's interesting. So take a little snapshot in your mind, what you're seeing here, because I want you to revisit that in your mind as we get into this. So a while back, when we were still working with how to manage our beef cow herd, we had a season where we had a really good acorn crop, right? And so this piece of ground, for 25 years, we never saw the contour of that ground. You just couldn't see it. Between prickly ash and all these other just nasty things, you couldn't see it. You get into there, and so this completely different scenario. So our accident, for 2 weeks, we didn't see our beef cows. And this is only about a 25-acre piece. 100 head were occupied. We had to go out there and find them, make sure we had cows, right? Because they were just gone. And we go up there and make sure, because we aren't even able to have an electric fence all the way around between rivers and railroads and everything else that impact this area. We spent a lot of time checking our cows, and we just kind of estimated, hoping that, well, if we got about 75, 80 counted, we'll leave the rest of there somewhere. And so what was pretty cool is now when we look at what we have to work with now, if we wanted to come in and impact that area with a forestry unit or whatever else, it was really dicey because there are some stumps out there, and I think Joe, as far as working with one of those machines, you back into stuff, you're wondering if it's going to come out in the same condition that it went in. In this situation, we can work with selectively harvesting out whatever we want to much easier than we could if we just go into an environment where we didn't have a cattle impact. One of the things I also really like is that I like to concentrate on what's going to come naturally, just because I'm really curious. When you can work on an understanding of soil succession, from when you leave it alone and understand where you are in the system and how it changes with management over time, it's really fun to watch, because then you start to wonder, well, what's in that seed bank? And what's the environment that I'm creating, and what's going to express itself? And so then when we get into some topics like some of Fred Provenza's work on those secondary compounds and how the interrelations in the diet work with what's eating those things and how it affects the big picture. This is what I think is super cool, is how does it affect the big picture as far as who consumes those products after they go through the farm. So if we can do some small changes over time, I mean, this was a mistake, really. We just happened to hit the right time with the cattle on that piece of property, and look the change that it made from the time that you couldn't see 2 feet, and I mean 2 feet, into that environment. And this is over time how things start to grow after we start getting some more sunlight. You can see there's a little bit more growth. Yes, it is a little bit later in the season, but before there wasn't a green thing on this floor at all. Now we've got the ability of those cows, like Tom had pointed out, that now we can get back to some of those instinctive qualities that our livestock have. And that actually can spread throughout a herd. So when you bring in cattle off the farm, they start looking at what your home cows have learned to do, and they can actually adapt accordingly as well. And that's exciting to watch. So it's a really unique situation. That's actually the river up on top. This is the North Fork Crow River. And so once we had some of that understory cleared out with our cattle, now we had to start getting a plan. We wanted to push this ahead and do some more experimentation. So we got the chainsaw. Now we can actually work with it. And there's only a couple different ways that we have access to that 25 acres of woods between springs and the river and everything else. So we got the chainsaw out so we could actually drive the loader up there if we wanted to do some clearing. And that was just kind of our first step. This is another view of that. So down further, we actually have to cross down here. We have what we call our rock bridge, where we have enough stones from all the years that we foolishly farmed, and we picked rock. The only good thing is we took them all back down to the river bottom, and we lined all our banks with those stones and actually had enough to support the equipment to cross the river. So there was a purpose in that, but I'm not going to go back to picking rock just to maintain it anymore for sure. So now we've got an area in which we can access this land a little bit better, and that's kind of our thought process as we clear some of this brush out. This was actually a failed IT attempt. This was a video that I wanted to show of some bale grazing that we've done in the winter. I think it's one of the biggest missed opportunities that we have, especially as we're learning how we can use management to impact these areas with the safety of the frost to support either cattle or equipment. And so what I can have you imagine here is that cows bale grazing a bale, no bale rings, some unrolled, some just putting the bales just like you've seen in other pictures before. But imagine in your mind all this snapping and crackling and all this impact that the cattle are doing. They're crunching down some of these branches that Tom talked about. And they're having an impact. And all that impact, if it's looked on as part of a planned disturbance, Alan Williams is really good about talking about this. Planned disturbance and altering that disturbance. But that can all contribute in a natural system that's been established for years and years from what we're looking at doing with our equipment. And it all makes a difference how that impact is delivered. This is the end result after some of that bale grazing. Now there used to be leaf litter here that's been worked in. This was late fall. And that's all going to have a difference as far as the amount of impact that you apply with your management. Here's a little bit more of a perspective on some of the thicker areas. But there's also that leaf litter. That leaf litter was just like it was in this last picture here. And you can see that kind of impact and what they leave behind. And that whole biological system is just really cool to start learning about. There's another picture. I mean, this is when we're starting to get more deliberate. That's actually one of my boys in the back there. And we're out there marking trees that we want to make sure that we don't miss and take out accidentally. So we want to do some of that work ahead of time before we start getting all crazy with the equipment. There's another one. It's also, so what's super cool is that it's an opportunity, it's a learning opportunity for the next generation too. I mean, when we're out there working, this is just my family. So they're looking forward, right? Whether they want to make a living off the farm or not. I told them all, I said, whether or not you want to do that for a living is your decision later, but I'm going to send as much with you with a knowledge base as I possibly can. And so I think there's tremendous value in that. And when we appreciate what we're doing and how we can implement that and explain that and give the big picture, I really want people to understand that the impact just begins here. It goes far beyond that. I mean, we're affecting the products that the people consume from the land that's managing cattle in the way we're doing it, and that's just going to keep going. Alan Williams is a tremendous resource, and one of the things he talks about a lot about is how every decision we make on the farm is either positive or negative, and it has cascading and compounding effects. So we oftentimes will look at our own little bubble and how we're going to make what we're doing work for our farm economically, ecologically, but keep in mind that we're affecting a lot more than that, than just what we see on our own. This is how it starts getting going. You can see this is one of the trees that we marked. We're still learning at that. This is an ongoing process. This is a journey, not a destination for sure for us. Again, I told you that we kind of came across it by accident, by mistake even maybe. And so just some ongoing pictures as we're going. You can see over here how it's more of a Oak Savanna established in the past, but we're just almost like a thermometer is raising its mercury. We're looking to start on one end of this piece of property and work through it. And there's going to be differences in some of those areas. Just another look. Some of the species, how tight, gnarly, and there's amazingly a lot of vining species that are on the upper story because they've kind of had to go up there, otherwise the cattle would have taken them out. And so now what I chose here to do, another thing is I really have a hard time, I understand burning has its place, but I have a hard time in my own mind thinking that nature has put all this energy into this product, and now we just want to gas it off. So I really do like the forestry application, but what we did here is I also noticed that throughout time we've got different concentrations and populations of cottontails, for example. We used to have a lot more when we had a thicker situation with our brush. And so you can't see it, and I don't have a very good picture, but right here there's a draw that comes up from the river. And it's probably about a 15 to 18 foot ravine that's been washed out. It's always been there since I can remember as a kid, so it's not necessarily something that's establishing itself. But we just took all the brush from the area that we cleared in some of the last pictures, and I took the loader and I just pushed it off the edge. Now we have an environment where cottontails can go and take refuge from coyotes and fox and that type of thing, and it's got some erosion control benefits as well. So just another look at how we're starting to affect that same area that we have in past pictures. And the great thing about a 1968 Kicks payloader that's been depreciated out for years is we can push some pretty big piles of brush, and they're all going down here into that ravine. Here's a path that we push the brush out. You can kind of see where this has been more done in the past and where we're headed to. This is where I get super excited, because we decided with Cody that Bale Grazing just makes sense. Again, one of the biggest missed opportunities. I think one of the things that people don't often realize is that when my cows are taking care of their business in the lot, is that we're losing half the nitrogen off the phosphorus, all the benefits of the urine, because they don't make the transfer at all. And then we're paying to do all that loss when we can get them out on the land. So we bale graze this area here. And if you think back again, because I'm not going to go back to my slide, but you remember that picture at the very beginning? You could see the ground beneath a lot of that spindly little. This whole area in here looked exactly like that before. And now, to me, this is like parkgery. This is an opportunity to create a better ecosystem, and then look at the public that has no idea what you're doing. They're going to be like, well, yeah, that looks pretty cool. That's almost a park-like scenario, right? So it's a good opportunity to start some good conversations with people that might wonder what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what's going to be some of the real results of that. Just another look, and you can see in some places where there's more hiring, where maybe cow pies were or urine patches were, it's a little spotchy, but I'm all right with that. This is another look at that ravine from a different angle where we started putting all that brush in. The other thing that I've noticed is that the plants that we bale graze that are established and thrive in these environments, they seem to really hold their nutrient content much later in the fall, from what I've noticed before. So this is stockpile. This was hit in June, and you can tell by the corn in the background, the neighbors there, that this is all established stockpile. We hit it pretty hard, but to me, that's a pretty darn good forage for beef cow. Oops. This isn't silvopasture, but this just, I'm always amazed at this. This is in our converted cropland acres, but we can seem to think that we're going to kill off a lot of nesting birds and that type of thing. There's not a tree around or anything else like that, but how they can graze around that whole nest and how that egg is undisturbed in there, I mean, that's just super cool to me. I mean, I think that's great. I don't know. No? Anybody know that? I'm just curious. The question was if anybody knows which species bird that was. A smart one, I think. Here's another thing we've noticed is that we've got higher concentrations of butterflies in areas. They are, in my opinion, without any proof, higher concentrations on places where we're managing our cattle effectively. This is just my last picture. It's another picture, but I wanted you to get a little bit of a visible indication of how tall the grass is. This is still May 10th, if I remember right, after we bale grazed a year, but my two boys they make me look pretty small, kind of like my dad, but so my oldest is 6'4" now, and I think he's 5'10", so if you get it last year? Let's see. I believe so. Yeah. I'm not I mean, it might be the year before. It might be the year before, because the 6th we still have. Anyway, that's just exciting to me, because we can see with something that turned from an accident, how we can use those observations to our benefit.
So we'll open it up to questions. Panel members want to come up and take the chairs up front. Tom?
And you think of some of these cows are eating alfalfa and corn silage. Or, I heard of a diet the other day that was corn silage, corn distillers, corn, and corn stalks ground up. So we need to keep increasing diversity, and you turn cows or goats or anything out into this. I like the goat idea, by the way.
For sure.
I might hire you.
You're going to get your own goats.
I like that too. That might be all right. So that's my experience, I guess. So I'm going to see what they have to say.
I think the last time we had a veterinarian on the farm was 2001. The one thing I like about what we're doing now is that we can watch what species are being consumed. Not that I'm smart enough to really put all that together, but for like example, plantain. Plantain has really come through in some of our converted cropland acres, and I can see different flushes where they'll consume more of that, and that's one of those natural wormers. The epigenetic effect, I think, is something really cool to watch. If to start getting some observation tools that you can kind of really be key and observe some of the condition. I mean, disposition has been huge in our herd. I can't describe that enough. I mean, okay, so two of my boys, a piece of a string of poly wire and a gate, sorted out 3 heifers out of 127 in 15 minutes in the middle of a pasture. That's super fun compared to what we used to do before was dangerous. We shouldn't have done it, right? So there's a peace of mind that the cattle can pick up on. They can balance their systems better, in my opinion, where they're just not sick and tired and have that edginess that I think we had created before with our petri dish type scenario and conditions in which we thought we were smart enough to give them everything they needed. The more we learn, I think the more we're proving to ourselves that we didn't and we still don't. So with that, I like to err on diversity always, altering that impact like I talked about before, because we're going to have flushes of different things that are going to come naturally in our systems, and it just keeps getting better, in my opinion.
I think we'll have to answer the exact same question. I think parasites are almost non-existent in my herd, and that's because they're eating so high up, and I think that's going to apply to almost any animal that we're using. So they're eating higher up, they're browsing more, they're not getting the parasites that they used to have. So yeah, it's great.
Take another question.
I was just going to say, as a forester, trees and weight on the root systems is a big concern. And I feel as though the grass, if you're managing your grass in the woods, grazing and taking the animals off at the right time, it's it's probably the same for the roots of the trees. Are you seeing any dieback on any of the trees, or you're keeping them in the woods? The trees you want to keep.
So, I had somebody out last spring after we very, very heavily bale grazed an area right on the edge of the silvopasture. He was very concerned that we were going to kill some of the trees. Now, shortly after green up, the cows were off, and everything came back to life. I would like to kill a few more trees with the cows, but we just haven't done that yet. I don't want to go out with a chainsaw and cut down a bunch of trees. I mean, I would love to, but I haven't found the time to do that. So if you guys want to do that, we come down, we could have a tree cutting party. So we haven't seen it yet.
One thing I'll add is I think when we start easing into the integrated livestock, we can actually increase the carrying capacity of that soil substantially. That was one of the biggest concerns I had in cropland conversion, that I was going to wipe out my perennial system. And I've had questions about times, but every time it's come back and it comes back better. Sometimes when you look back and you think there's no difference in your neighbor that has a full tillage program, and the fact that you just take a piece of tillage on your ground in 5 years, and the next spring you allow for extra time, and you're thinking that your mistake could actually help you in the long run. So I think the same thing could happen if we're deliberate and we have at least a good mindset before we go into those scenarios. It's no different. I mean, what you're seeing with carrying capacity as well as with equipment.
Yep.
Is it on?
Talk to you more.
I didn't have much to add to that, except everything that we're talking about puts the farmer and management back into the process. So the first answer I'd say, well, watch the trees. And the other part of the answer is most systems, including the trees, will look back. If you're damaging your surface works, they're going to put some down. It's just allow Mother Nature a chance to adapt and manage watching it carefully.
How do you guys go about getting water to your livestock, especially when you're out there in the winter time grazing?
Should I answer that? Because I have that biggest challenge being off the farm.
Yeah.
We carry water with us. We don't assume that anybody has water, that there is water available. Sometimes we can go up to a waterway, but not always. So we have a 30-gallon tank that we haul around, and then we usually just bucket it over to the goats. Now, goats don't drink as much water as cattle, so we only go through about 15 to 30 gallons a week with 30 goats. So, but they're so goats are so easy, you guys. You gotta get some. But also think about the fact that they're in the woods, they're under shade, and they're eating buckthorn, which has a ton of water in it. It's like lettuce all day long for them. So that's why. How do you guys do it?
So when we're in the trees at home, we let the cows have 4 legs. We let them walk back up to the house. That's how we normally do it. But we also have some streams through there, and we do let them drink through the streams. But in the winter, they're usually frozen. And then we've got some springs as well that we've tried. We're working on developing some springs and making some watering systems with some of those. When we are out grazing cover crops, though, that's a whole different ballgame, because we're hauling cows, kind of like you are with your goats, but we're going out onto other people's cropland fields. And when we do that, I always look for 2 things. I always look for a shelter belt or a windbreak of some sort, and then some sort of water source. And we've done a lot of different things. Last year, we actually ran about 3/4 of a mile of black line above the ground. And then I drilled a hole in the stock tank, and I set a float up so it was continuous flow. And that worked until it worked till 5 below 0, until a radish leaf plugged the hole. Then the whole line was frozen. So we had to coil that all the way around. We brought it up to a heated shed and drug it all up there, which is a lot of work. It took a couple days to get it thawed out. This year our cows went from the day before Thanksgiving, when we got our first snow, until the 2nd of January without any water. But they were grazing very wet cover crops, with a fair amount of wet snow. And I've got friends in Saskatchewan that have done that for years, and I was always scared to try it, but I didn't have time to water the cows, and they didn't act like they needed it, so.
I cheat. You saw the first slide, I have a mile of the Snake River winding through the farm. So every winter pasture for the bison, cattle, horses, and sheep all have access to the river. So, buy a farm.
With your goats, grazing in buckthorn, how many sessions or how many years of grazing will it take before you kill that root system?
So I actually had a picture of that. I'm sorry I didn't put it up there, but so we usually see results after 1 year. So we bring them in twice during the warm season, and then the next year what we're going to see is anything that's about 4 to 6 feet tall is usually dead, and then all we're seeing that second year is from the seed bank or resprouts from the base. And so we're typically working on a project for about 3 to 5 years, depending on what that seed bank is. But I mean, I wouldn't ever say that we have an elimination situation on our hands. I haven't been in business that long, for one thing, but you know, maybe as time goes on, we'll have more data and that kind of thing.
Question for Doug. On the picture, all that grass is natural? You never see it in
100%. One thing with, two things. One thing I'd like to say is that there's only one invasive species, and that's mankind, in my opinion. Okay, so when we're looking at what we want to thrive in an environment, we have to look more at our impact on that environment, I believe, instead of species specific. Because when we're bringing cattle in, we're including that element that in a lot of situations has been just removed for decades. And so once we can introduce that again, especially with some planning and some purpose and some foresight, then we can have a lot better success. But how we're changing that soil environment, I think, is critical, and to keep that in mind when we're looking at how we're making our decisions. And I do have a developed spring. I think it'd be pretty cool to see. We took Pritzco actually made an upright for us that we have a spring that came into a pond, and so the pond is our reservoir, and we put it at the right elevation where it comes up inside this 2-foot dual wall tile, and we have an overflow built right into that. And so it has to come, the water has to circulate up to come into the overflow out to the hillside. I wish I brought pictures because it's actually pretty cool. It was what our cattle depended on last year, 2 years ago, 100%. This last year we had enough warm weather where the river didn't freeze over for more than a couple weeks at a time.
I'd like to suggest we're not an invasive species, but a species that can introduce invasive cultural practices.
Good addition.
Is there any problem with plant diseases for you all who just let all the brush and stuff decompose in the forested areas? You were saying the cattle just trample them. Is there any like you have like black knot on your trees or anything? Have you had any issue with that?
We haven't, maybe you guys have, but I haven't noticed anything adverse yet.
I haven't noticed it at our place. We have some issues at our tree farm that we're trying, and I'm hoping that bringing in the livestock and increased plant diversity can help with that.
And the tree farm doesn't have livestock?
Not yet. I cannot wait to get them there.
So when you bale graze, like you said, you mixture of alfalfa and grass hay. Well, then you said you also don't go to the same spot. So how much do you space out the bales? Like, do you space them out like 50 yards, or do you space them out 100 yards or something? Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. So the question was, how far do we space out our bales when we're bale grazing? I'm gonna talk a little bit about that for a second, then I'll hand it over. I don't feed grass alfalfa. We actually 100% of our grass hay that our cows get throughout the winter is actually baled off of rim ground, So and we can't cut that until the 1st of August, so it's fully matured. So when I said I don't plant any perennial species, that's probably a lie, because I'm pretty sure I'm bringing in a lot of seed with me. So we're utilizing that. I'll do two things. I'll either try to focus where the brush is, but I'll usually make sure that we're at least 10 feet apart from where the last bales were, and I'll usually try to set out about 2 weeks worth of hay when I do it.
I used to think you could space them, 100 feet apart or something and get benefit, but I haven't found that to be true. If you look at the outside after they eat a bale, I move it after each bale. Okay, so one bale in a spot. And there'll be 10 to 15 feet of disturbed manure pack, dug up area around it. So you're maybe dealing with a 30 or 35 foot radius, and that's it. The next bale the rig should touch that, pretty close to it.
One last question?
I'll steal the last one. But for the cattle guys, when you're doing the winter stuff, I'm curious if you're also doing any corn, protein lick tubs, or any other supplementing, or is it 100% grass? And what do you guys see for, especially pregnant stock?
Was the question, do we supplement?
Yeah, in addition to the hay. Like
No. No, minerals always, of course. And that's a lot of farmers overlook that. Minerals are crucial. No, not other than that.
I have used a protein lick tub supplement from time to time, but I don't do it generally. I watch the condition of the cows, but they always have salt and mineral.
I approach it a little bit different. My mineral program is Redmond salt, and that's all I do. But I really believe that moving our calving window to when we do, our requirements are lower than they used to be during the winter, and I can utilize a higher roughage feed in those winter cold months. That's made quite a difference.
Okay, I guess that's it.
Just a second, I want to add one thing I did. I grass finish, so I don't claim to finish any animals except in the midsummer and later. So if I was finishing in the winter, I'd have to supplement somehow. I can't imagine what I'd do.